There are a few filmmakers not regularly testing their movies, like Christopher Nolan, Steven Spielberg, Woody Allen. But most filmmakers, Michael Bay, Ron Howard, James Cameron, I mean, so many of them have tested throughout the years.
Long climax courtroom sequence, which is a good 40 minutes of the film. In the version we tested, somebody else played the judge. He actually recast the judge and shot it with Kumud Mishra.
Anybody who does not embrace this process is A, not in touch with reality, or B, not relevant to today's world where there is so much choice to not watch a movie.
Have you always wondered how a film makes money? Are you one of those people in your friends group who's always talking about box office numbers? Or are you curious to know what goes in and around a producer's mind? Who is a producer? Who spends the money? Who makes the money? Budget kitna lagta hai? Profit kitna banta hai? Hi, I'm Vanita Kohli-Khandekar, and I'm going to take you on this journey beyond the box office. I'll be chatting with producers, studio heads, trade analysts, directors, and even script testers. People who have money and some people who don't. Don't worry, मैं उनसे उनके on-set experiences के बारे में नहीं पूछूंगी. किसने कौन सा prank किया ये भी नहीं पूछूंगी. So stay tuned to Beyond the Box Office.
Hi everyone, welcome to Beyond the Box Office. We have Kevin Goetz sitting right there in Hollywood, who has, I think his firm has become 14 years old today, Screen Engine. And there's Shailesh Kapoor of Ormax Media, which is more than a decade old in the business of not just testing, but doing a whole lot of film research. Kevin's book, Audienceology, has also done very well. I've been through bits of it, not all the book. But, these are two minds which I've been wanting to interview for a long time. So here we have both of them. Many years back, I had interviewed a very senior filmmaker and lyricist. I tried to interview him and I said, I'm doing a story around research in filmmaking. And he said, that's not a subject that interests him at all. And that research in filmmaking is not something that should be discussed. That to me told me how much this topic creates conflict for filmmakers in many ways. With that, Kevin, I'll start with you. How does film testing work in Hollywood? Where are you right now? Could you give us some examples? Take us through what Screen Engine does.
Thank you for having me, first off. And it's very, very nice to be here and to talk about something that's very passionate in my life and something I'm passionate about and something that's very important to the making of American movies. The screening process is very much a part of, and maybe one of the most important parts of the overall movie making experience. It typically takes place in post-production, but we're testing things even before they even shoot a frame of film. So I want to just express to you that the way it works is typically a director, by the union law rules, gets about a 10-week period of cutting their movie and editing the movie. And within that period of time, they get to play and do whatever they're going to do with no interference. After that, the audience preview generally takes place, and it's usually the director's cut. And from that, feedback is given from an audience of, say, 250 to 300 people. It's brought together into a report that is then communicated to the filmmakers, to the financiers, to the people that are connected to the movie to make the movie as commercial as possible, to look at any confusions that may exist, to deal with any pace issues that may bore people or create a situation that they're not engaged in the film, and the characters, how are they landing? The ending, how is it working? The positives as well as the challenges. And all of this is distilled into a report, and there's follow-up meetings to discuss and to distill how to communicate what is very sensitive, because you're talking about artistic children, aren't you, when you're talking about a movie? This notion of filmmakers, or the example that you brought up, in my view, is very boring to hear. And I find anybody who does not embrace this process is A, not in touch with reality, or B, not relevant to today's world, where there is so much choice and so much reason to not watch a movie, that what we want to do is give you every advantage to appeal to the largest number of folks you possibly can. And audiences are uncannily truthful. Audiences are wonderfully honest, and they don't have any agenda. They just want to come and enjoy something. So when you're not communicating what you may think you're communicating, an audience will tell you. And if you're smart enough, listen. And if you don't, do so at your own peril.
Shailesh, you want to take me through, because I know you've done huge amounts of work here in India, and you've been the pioneer as far as this process is concerned in India. And there's a lot of script testing that happens too. You want to take us through some of this?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do is on this side of our work is quite similar to what Kevin said. I think the difference probably is that our journey is more recent, in the sense that we are also 15 years old as a company. But when we started, people were doing test screenings as friends and family screening. They will call cousins and uncles and aunts and make them sit in a edit studio and make them watch the film and then collect some data. Or some people go to a local college and ask some boys or girls to come and give them some casually designed questionnaires and make them fill something. So a lot of this is obviously, from a research rigor point of view, unscientific and not recommended. But this was happening casually, but it was all happening in a way to just little bit create some sense of feedback rather than follow a more rigorous process. So when we started in 2010 is when we started testing films, and TV shows we've been testing a little before that. I think our journey has been more about converting people and making them see value in it. And it's a slow process, but in the Hindi film industry, I think by and large that in the last 4 or 5 years, we feel we have reached a point where almost everybody, barring a few exceptions, is comfortable with it, actually is looking forward to it. And some of the bigger films have been tested. So it's not like everybody's testing, but I would say in Hindi film industry, at least 30-40% films that are releasing have been tested at some stage or the other, either script or film, sometimes both, sometimes trailer also. It's now in the recent years, last 2-3 years, that I think we're doing the same journey for Tamil and Telugu and some of the other languages where the industries are slightly more, I would say, traditional from this data perspective. And we almost, like when we talk to those industries, we are back in 2010 in our heads, because that's what we started with the Hindi industry. But we have seen the mindset change in Hindi a lot. There were directors 10 years old who told us, like, there is no way I will ever test a film of mine, and today they're testing all their films.
You shared one example with me when we had a chat earlier, and you shared an example in the book I wrote also.
Yeah, so I think as a use case, a lot of people ask us, how can one use findings of a research, and Kevin touched upon it. But that example that, I wrote that little caselet in your book on the film Mulk, which came around 5 years ago, just before the pandemic, is one of the most interesting examples, because those who have seen the film would know and remember that in the long climax courtroom sequence, which is a good 40 minutes of the film, the actor Kumud Mishra plays the judge. In the version we tested, he actually was not there. Somebody else played the judge. And there was feedback, and Anubhav Sinha, who's the director, has gone on record to talk about this. The other actor didn't get good feedback because it was coming across as unintentionally funny and somewhat off character, and was bringing down the intensity of the scene. Audiences were laughing when they should have actually been engaged dramatically with the moment. I think Anubhav Sinha did something which very few people actually do. I mean, as a director, as somebody who's has the final say on the film, he actually recast the judge, and it's a multi-camera setup, and he shot it with Kumud Mishra from what that film was, when we tested, to what that film was when it eventually released. We didn't retest it because there wasn't enough time and all of that. But dramatic improvement in how the last 45 minutes of the film engages. Now, whether the impact of that in terms of box office can be quantified or not, that could be a mathematical exercise, but definitely the impact is far, far more than what the cost of a research would be or things like that.
Kevin, Shailesh said that 30-40% of in the Hindi cinema gets tested. In Hollywood, is it like all 100%, all films are tested, or you still have the outliers who don't buy into the whole thing?
It's less about buying in and more of a security issue, if you will.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, for example, buy-in, I think there are a few filmmakers that just simply are not regularly testing their movies, like Christopher Nolan. Steven Spielberg typically does not test. Woody Allen never really tested his movies.
Mm-hmm.
But most filmmakers, Michael Bay, Ron Howard, James Cameron, I mean, so many of them have tested throughout the years. And even Steven has tested movies.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, I think when there's an issue at hand or there's a real question is when you want to do it. And as I said, as the stakes get higher and the price goes up for budgets and the price of marketing goes up, the stakes are higher and you need to know more certain what is going on. I'm an artist at the heart of who I am. That needs to be said. I also have a very pragmatic sense of correlations. And there is a correlation between whether a person is going to definitely recommend a movie and the length of time it will remain in theaters. We call that the legs.
Okay.
So in other words, if something scores, let's say, 20 points above the norm, and the norm is a C grade. Do you have in India A, B, C, D, F like we do in America? We have those grades.
Yeah, no, normally we go with a score out of 100. So yeah, it's a number.
So then what would a C grade in America would be like a 70. A 70 is not great. It's okay. If you have a 70, you don't get excited. When you start getting an 80, your parents begin to say, oh, okay, you're doing all right. And then by the time you're 90, you're in an A- territory in America. So, and what we say is the better your score is, the more you're going to have word of mouth, which in turn will actually be able to tell you what kind of legs you're going to have. So we're not trying to torture a filmmaker. We're trying to say, by you keeping those 20 minutes that you're fighting for, filmmaker, as opposed to doing a cut without those 20 minutes, and there's a 25-point difference in your scores, you could be leaving millions of dollars on the table. You could be leaving so much money on the table because you're not paying attention. People are coming out of the movie saying, it's too long, I was bored. As opposed to, I really love this experience, which is why we often reshoot endings or change endings. Or in the case of Shailesh's case, changing a judge. I mean, that's a little overreaching to a lot of the people that I work with. The judge would have to be such an integral part of, not just they didn't like the person, they must really have disliked this person. And this person must have been hurting the credibility of the movie in order for them to make such a dramatic change, because that's a complete and utter reshoot. But that's why we do this, because there are direct correlations to these things, and you're creating, in this art form, you're creating it for the masses. You're not creating it in a vacuum for yourself.
Accepted, but when people come to you, what is it? You said direct correlation to, say, word of mouth, or how many people would recommend your film or enjoy your film. Is the box office also on people's mind? I mean, what are the variables which come into play when people come for testing or for research? Or is it just discovered?
Let me just say one thing. When you are an auteur, the French word, which essentially means that you've written, starred in, produced, and directed the movie that you're in, and you financed it yourself, go with God. If no one sees it, you don't want anyone to see it, that's fine. 99.99% of every movie is not that. So every movie should have a screening to inform what you have. Ron Howard, arguably one of the greatest living filmmakers, says it best. He says, I get to choose the script that I work on. I get to cast it. I get to work on the script. I get to shoot it my way. And then I even get to edit it for 10 weeks my way. But then the rubber hits the road. I have to show it to an audience. And maybe what I went out to communicate is not being communicated, and I need to know that.
Okay.
And that's the smart way to move. So even though that is your intention, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, is the old saying. It doesn't mean that it's the right move or the effective move. And we are there to be, Shailesh and I, truth tellers. It takes years to make a movie. It takes years to come up with the idea, to make it, then to find the financing, and then to sit in one night and hear 300 people rip it apart can be very devastating. So you have to have a certain degree of compassion and empathy and also candor to be able to say, look, I love your movie, but then again, 300 people are having a problem with the ending. You want to pay attention to that.
How does this work, Shailesh? For example, and these are comparisons I'm very curious about, because India is this huge, diverse market. And while I'm familiar with the US, but I don't know how the sampling works. Is it one screening? Is it 3-4 screenings? Because I know, Shailesh, you do about 4 or 5 screenings.
Yeah, we normally do 4 to 5 cities. And in each city, we would do either 1 or 2 screenings, depending on how wide we are going in terms of.
And how many people on an average in every screening?
Yeah, so it would be typically 100 per city, which will be 2 screenings of 50, and that would be around 400 to 500 across 4 or 5 cities. So there's certain films which may be more multiplex skewed, which would normally be tested in Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore. So that could even be 3 cities, but most of the bigger films, we would have a mix of Bombay, Delhi kind of markets, but Mumbai, Delhi, and combine that with, say, an Ahmedabad or an Indore or a Lucknow or a Kanpur. So you get a sense of different parts of India as well as different types of audiences in terms of the pop strata and generally their taste of content.
What is the science of the sampling? I mean, do you work at who is going to be attending this screening, or is it random? I mean, I don't know how this works.
No, so I think we have a panel of more than 2 lakh or 0.2 million people from which we sample. So no person attends more than 1 screening in 6 months, because after the point, you don't want them to become experts. Within that, obviously there are criteria on regular theater going. So if somebody is not watched Jawan, Pathan, Animal, there, or at least 2 of these, they would not make it to the screening. So you don't want people who are fringe viewers, you want regular viewers, and there may be specific criteria related to certain films. For example, if there's a franchise film, you may want to have a certain quota on people who have watched the first part and those kind of things. So a lot of this is discussed with the studios and decided mutually. We always have a suggested design, and there is always going to be some dialogue in terms of what the vision of the director and the producer is in terms of what kind of target audience they think this film will get. But you don't want to skew it too much, because then you would get results which may not be representative of the market. But this is something because, once people work with us over several movies, they've got fair understanding of the process. And the same holds true from a security and a privacy perspective. Initially, I think a lot of times the first project, people are very concerned about what if my film gets leaked? What if somebody takes a video and puts it online? What if somebody tweets a review after a screening? And, there are non-disclosure agreements people sign. There is a protocol on not getting mobiles into the theater and all of that. So once people go through that experience once and they see that protocol playing out at the actual screening, I think that comfort comes with subsequent projects, that this is something that, over now, because, we have, as on date, tested 970 pieces of content. So a lot of it is television, a lot of it is films and OTT or streaming. But over several projects, obviously, the fact that data should not be leaked becomes one of the main points that we have to focus on, because we know that if one project, something like that happens, a large part of this work would tend to suffer. So I think that's something which is very important as well.
Are studios generally happy with the sample size? Because that's in all, not just in content testing, but in all media. Whether I look at television, music, etc., sampling is like one big contentious issue. Even in digital, where there's no third-party measurement in India, but is the sampling thing, is that a thing for concern, or especially because we are a very diverse country, it's a heterogeneous country?
I think there's a difference between sampling for measurement or currency, which is what, say, a TV ratings would be, or any ratings mechanism will be, or like an IRS or a BAC, versus sampling for gauging perceptions or to content. Because here you are trying to get a range or a sense of how well the content will be liked and what kind of changes do you want to give. You are not really, there is no buying or selling that is happening on this number.
Okay.
It is, so in that sense, and typically, if you go to 4 cities versus go to 5 cities, the incremental that you get from the 5th city is marginal. It at some point in time, it may not even justify the cost of adding a 5th city or a 6th city to the research design. Because if you choose the markets depending on the genre of the film and depending on where the audience of that film are likely to come from, I think it's about wise selection of markets, and good quality of sample is equally important along with the sample size. But when it comes to currency research, obviously sample size becomes far more important because money is riding on it in a very different way.
Okay. Kevin, at your end, how does it work? I mean, how many screenings would a film take? And how do you measure impact? I mean, especially because your market is very developed compared to the market we operate in. How do you measure impact? I mean, are there sort of variables which have been set out in the beginning that we will look at this when the film is released? Or is it once you've released it and there's a comfort level? So there are 2 questions there. One is on the sampling, and
there were actually probably more than 2 questions. Let me start with the first. How many screenings does a typical movie go through? I would say probably 3 iterations. We have different ways of working. Shailesh and I don't do the same thing because Indian infrastructure is very different than America's. We have multiplex infrastructure here that is far greater in every state and every city. We can fill one theater with 300 people. We also have a synchronous way of working as an online screening where we get nationwide around America, the different populations in Minneapolis, Oakland, Miami, Dallas, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago. And so that is 300 people that are all coming in at the same time. Now, we do have 3 time zones here in the States, so it can get tricky. What I do care about is making sure the right people see the right movie. And by that, as Shailesh says, we discuss it with the studio. In America, we are much more obsessed than, say, in India. Well, I can't speak about India, but I can speak about the European countries. They're homogenous countries. America is very divided by ethnicity and race, African American and Black, Hispanic, Latino, Caucasian. And we have each of those groups have cultural cues that are not unimportant, and in fact have different normative data associated with the different racial or ethnic groups, so that we want to usually have a pretty diverse group. But if something has no, say, Asian characters whatsoever, we may have a small percentage of Asian. I mean, 6% of our entire American population is of Asian descent, and Asian is a huge catchphrase for Indian, for Japanese, for Chinese, for Filipino, Vietnamese, et cetera, et cetera. So we always want at least 40% Caucasian in an audience. And we typically, if it's a very art house or smart house movie, something that's a little more indie minded, we may want to go to more of the cities as opposed to the rural areas. Just like I imagine in India, it's the same thing. You have more of a sophistication and more of an education level that's in the cities. So we try to go where the movie is most likely to have the largest audience. That said, we may do 3 screenings we'll do one screening, they cut out 10 minutes, we come back and test it, the scores come up, we test it again, it needs a new ending, they reshoot a new ending, 6 weeks later, we come back again, we test it again, the scores come up, and we're actually moving those scores up, which increases the definite recommend. But then we may say, well, we've tested it in Los Angeles, in and around Los Angeles. Let's go to Kansas City and see how it plays from a marketing standpoint. So it's not just the diagnostics of the movie that we're getting. It's also marketing intel that will help inform the campaign. Favorite scenes, favorite parts, what characters are they, what does it remind them of? How are they going to talk about it? How are they going to discuss? Those are all important issues that also go into what we uncover at a test screening.
Are there, I want to come to the process in a bit again, but are there tools that you use? Again, this is a question for both of you, because what tech tools would you use in this process of testing, and any role that AI is playing? Because I see a lot of AI work happening here in India with media companies, but I'm curious about audience research and whether, how much technology is at play there and whether AI is playing a role.
I mean, we are very, very into evolving and using technology as our friend. For example, we have digital devices that are handed out at every screening. We used to use pencil and paper, and we are able to do immediate reactions, immediate feedback, even before the focus group begins, which we do after every screening. We conduct a focus group of about 20 people who stay after, who are a microcosm of the whole recruited audience of, say, 300. So we know kind of how and where to lead, or to uncover, or to dive into the discussion period afterwards. So it is, remember this from when you think about sample sizes, this is what we call a quali-quant exercise. This is not 2,000 people. It would be unaffordable to do 2,000 people. It also, there's a point, as Shailesh very smartly said, a point at which you're not gaining any more information. We find somewhere around 300 people per screening give us enough directional insight to make pretty damn good assumptions. That would be from about 300 people and then about 20 people in a focus group to craft the story that we're trying to tell. And the story is to guide them, to give them a roadmap of what to do next. And sometimes you have flawed DNA that you discover in a movie. And that's a bummer, because what are you going to do with that information other than cast a new character, change? There are times when the stakes are so high. When we tested, I just recently worked on something that's yet to be released. It's an animated movie. They ended up showing it in I own a facility in North Hollywood where we do dial testing, almost like a heart monitor, while people are watching the program. And this is a movie, and they use just animated sketches. And you could see how in the beginning of the movie, let me see if I can get this right. In the beginning of the movie, it went up, 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 up. There's 3 acts in a movie, typically. Typically, there are 3 acts. In the first act, it went up and up. In the second and third act, it was like this. Terrible, terrible, terrible. They went back and spent $800,000 to redo all of the sketches. They didn't even animate it yet, because it costs about $1 million for 1 minute of animation.
Yeah.
And so way too expensive to do that. So they went back, spent that much money to redo, and you saw the dial. They came back months later, 4 months later, 5 months later, to do, and then to do, and it had the right trajectory. And the reason it did is because they had the first act, the setup was okay, but then the whole movie lost its steam. What if they didn't do that? Imagine going to that first screening, which was 70% animated. So they've already spent, I don't know, $70 million on a movie, let's say, and they discover they have a DNA problem. You would lose millions of dollars potentially. Typically, you try to put Band-Aids on it. You try to put paper clips and rubber bands and spit to try to make it better. But you can't. You can only do so much. They were able to be smart enough to discover at the earliest process to make those changes. And now we believe the movie is going to be a massive success.
Fantastic. Shailesh, you want to talk about the tools and the stuff that you use?
Yeah, so the thing with using technology or any kind of
that
tools,
work in India is good.
yeah, is that we are still in a market where we're trying to make more and more people adopt testing as an idea.
Correct.
And as much as technology is fascinating, adding a layer of that does add to the cost, and not everybody who is willing to pay that upfront. So that's something that one has to handle on a case-to-case basis. But I think one of the areas where we are using what can be called loosely machine learning is a lot of our forecast models. So whether it's in testing or it's in tracking, the idea of collecting data over many years, of course, the pandemic came in between, and a lot of the pre-pandemic data today is not relevant, but collecting data over the years for many, many films and using that data to create norms and to be able to create predictive models, which can actually give you a sense of what the box office range would be, is also equally a part of technology. So technology doesn't always need to be visible at the time of the screening. It could be in a post-analysis stage that it also comes in. And that's something that, we specialize in, because a lot of test screenings where, as a producer, if I come and I see the focus groups and I will see, as Kevin said, the movie being ripped apart at times, but it's when the analytics come to life is when you really see different aspects of it, which may not be obvious when you're attending the screening yourself. So it's a mix of research and data analysis that kind of creates a overall story or report, which then becomes far more useful and nuanced and actionable than just, so it's a classic qual-quant mix, as Kevin said. The qualitative part is
quality and quanti mix.
Yeah, when you're hearing audiences, and the quantitative part is when you're being able to analyze the data in a certain way and predict certain outcomes.
But from how long does the process from the time a studio or a producer comes to you to the time this research is over and it is delivered what it is supposed to deliver? How much time does it take, and what does it cost me as a studio or as a production company?
So the time varies depending on number of markets in India. So typically for up to 3 markets, it will be around 2 to 2.5 weeks from the time they confirm and the film is ready for us to watch. And then, to do the test screenings and to give the results. I know Kevin gives same-day results, and over here also some people are in a hurry, but a lot of times we are testing much before the release, and there is that kind of urgency is not there at times. When you're doing 4 or 5 markets, it would be 3 weeks, sometimes even 3.5, 4 weeks. Sometimes the producers want to take a break after one city, little bit analyze if they have any feedback, and then go back to the next city. So that also happens. So it's really a function of how much time is on hand and how
from 2 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, and whether there's a release around the corner.
I'm sorry, Shailesh. The problem with that methodology, of course, is that if you do that, you don't know if it's the city that's the problem or the change of the movie. So you really need to have an apples to apples comparison.
Right.
I will say for us, it's about a week to 10 days. Which we have I've been doing this a really long time. This is my 37th year doing it. So we have infrastructure so deep that we turnkey it very much so. It's like putting on, Shailesh will tell you, a mini wedding. It's so many details. That's why so few people are in our business, because what we do is very, very labor intensive, and it requires a certain kind of stomach and a certain kind of strength to get through it. The deliverables, look, they're making decisions the night of the screening. We usually do a screening, they get their data sometimes that night, they'll get a full report within 24 hours, and the next day we're doing a full debrief. We call it a post-mortem, and that is laying out the path to success. We often are involved in those meetings with the heads of the studios, with the producers, with the directors, and sometimes, look, I've been called a lot of names.
How disappointed creators tackle, what do they call you? and you and Shailesh, both of you. I know Shailesh has faced some
Well,
problems.
am I allowed to curse on this podcast? So I've been called everything from the doctor of audienceology. Let me get this. The doctor of audienceology. That's my, I've been called that focus group guy. I've been called that arrogant asshole. I've been called a lot of things. Mostly I'm called, and honestly, and people say, thank you. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for the honesty. And I think Shailesh will understand this. We are like doctors. You have to come in and say, your baby is sick. But if you do this, and if you do this, your baby's going to be fine. If you do this and this, your baby may be the president of India. If you do this or this, you may just get by. They'll have a kind of a normal life. This is the kind of thing we have to come out. You have to understand how close these people are to these. It's an art form, guys. It's an art form. Don't kill the messenger. We're just conveying results, but they want to come after us. The price for us is probably considerably more expensive than it is in India. A typical screening is around 25,000 US, but that does not include the price of the theater and the technical costs, if there are any needed. So all in, you're looking at probably around between $30,000 and $40,000 for a test of about 300 people.
Shailesh, what does it look like in India?
Yeah, so including the cost of the theater and the logistics and the travel and everything, it typically comes to 15 lakh or 1.5 million rupees, 25 lakhs or 1.5 to 2.5 million rupees is what generally it would come to, depending on number of markets and all of that.
But remember, Shailesh is she's getting 50 or 60 people per market, or 100 maybe.
100, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So this would come to like
$20,000, about $20,000
would be typically for 3 markets and all of that. So it's like roughly half of what it is there. Vanita, one interesting thing in this is that when we started, right, studios didn't know where to get this money out from, because they don't have a budget. But what has started happening in the last 5-6 years is that it's now become a line item in the budget of the film. So it is being budgeted as, so it's something which is now a part of the planning of a film. It's a part of the cost of the film. It's not seen as an extra.
That's right. That's right.
And that's huge movement, coming from the Indian market, because I used to cover marketing at one time, and research budgets were rubbish in India, always. So this is, to me, that a studio is spending on film research is such a big thing. I mean,
remember, but Vanita, remember that, if you will, the production screenings usually come out of the budget of the movie.
Okay.
The marketing screenings usually come out of the studio's marketing budget. But the point that Shailesh makes is that now at least they're part of the budgets. They used to just be, where are we going to come up with the money? It was like an extravagance or a not needed. That's why I want to challenge the first person that I don't know who this first person you recommended, I think spoke about. I thought it was a composer, you said, and I don't mean to be, I don't know anything about the person, but to be so limited in how they think, it's like, it's a person, it's the same person who says, streaming a movie. How could you stream a movie? Well, ask Generation Z, ask young people how they can stream a movie. They can stream a movie much better and more efficiently and more facilely and easily than anyone, say, our age, or, it's like, it doesn't matter to them. They are screen agnostic, and so it's like so it's really a societal change. So there are still people that are older filmmakers who will look down on the idea of how an audience can tell me what to do. And I understand them, but I sort of poo-poo them. They're now in the absolute minority.
That's in your market. I'm not sure if that's how it works in our market, Shailesh. I don't know how you feel about that. But you know what? One of the things was very curious about asking you guys is, if I was to ask you, and Kevin, you've been doing this longer, what are the three big things you've come out of with, if I was to ask you, Kevin, just distill all that you've learned in these years into 3 points, what would you say there?
Well, let's go back and forth so I don't monopolize. My first thing would be, if the audience tells you what they are feeling, believe them.
Shailesh?
So it's essentially the fact that we have to play the role of messengers, and our job is to tell the truth. I think initially there was always some sense of hesitation, but over the years we have liberated ourselves of the responsibility of feeling bad for a film or feeling good for a film. I think our role is not to get emotionally attached to the product, even if we like it ourselves. And I think there is certain confidence and objectivity that comes with that idea, and I think that also gets you respect over time. In fact, one of the things I should say is that the projects where there have been maximum use of the research findings is where the directors have been directly engaged with the process, because
and
sometimes
the process,
when they have been also part of it, like there have been instances when the producer has insisted on a screening and therefore the director has said, okay, go ahead, but the director is not himself or herself engaged with the process. What happens is that there are changes on the table, recommendations are there, but the director is not very keen on implementing them. So the entire process becomes theoretical. It's on paper. It never gets implemented. The money has been spent, but the outcome is not there because there's no change as such. Maybe
the first
some
thing is
market.
that be involved.
Yeah, and I think so. Therefore, from a creative process perspective, I think it is in our interest, and it has been in our interest over the years, to get directors to be engaged. And we feel like as much as the studios are paying for it, directors are equally a target audience for us to convince them of the significance and the importance of this process in today's day, when there's so much clutter and with all the streaming content available, that you cannot take the audience for granted. And audience can be brutal in rejection more than ever before. So we live in times where, and at the end of the day, if you don't test it now, the film will come out on a Friday and it will get tested in the real world.
Good.
So
Okay.
there is no escaping that.
Well said. Yeah, Kevin, you want to
add? Two other areas I'll jump on with that is, good is not good enough. Very good is not good enough.
Okay.
It must be excellent. It must be top box. If it's not, it's just not going to compete in and find its way in all this noisy environment that Shailesh just spoke about. The third thing I would add is listen. Filmmakers, listen. Put your listening ears on. What they say, God gave you one mouth and two ears for a reason. And the reason is because, do you have what do you call where you drive on? Motorway, freeway, highway? How do you say it? Highway. So if somebody honks the horn at you on the highway, they're a jerk. They're an ass. If 5-7 people honk at you on the highway, you're the ass. You're the jerk.
Yeah.
When people are telling you multiple times that your movie is too long, that your movie is too confusing, that your ending is a downer and doesn't work, listen and do something about it.
And the fact that this is an industry in India, and I'm sure same in Hollywood, which is a very infectious industry, in the sense that good word of mouth as well as bad word of mouth travels within the industry very fast. So I think one of the things we always tell makers is speak to other makers who have used it, and ask them what their experience has been, because that's one of the strongest marketing tools for us. When directors have recommended to other directors that you must test your film, because I think that works beautifully, because at the end of the day, it's not that big an industry, and it's unlike the TV industry. In film industry, people actually talk to each other. So it's easier.
Have you got it terribly wrong sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, there will always be instances. I think most of the time when we get it wrong, it is that we underestimate a success story which becomes much bigger than it we thought it may become. It's in that direction more than the other direction, I would say. Like a film like Andhadhun, for example, we tested it, it tested well, but then eventually what it became was even bigger than
Yeah, it
what we
became a
tested. Because sometimes films acquire a life of their own. They get that kind of new audiences coming in, people who are not regular theater goers who will begin to endorse it. So there will always be cases like that. I think in the last few years, generally those have been rare exceptions. And broadly, the zone has been fairly correct. And in general, also people are using it to make changes. And a lot of times it is not tested after the changes. So that sense of how much impact was there is a little qualitative rather than quantified.
I just want to say we're also talking about Indian filmmaking
Huh.
and American filmmaking. We have to recognize that there is so much opportunity internationally, and America and India have never had a very good relationship with each other's films. And I know that Indians do not consume much of America's films as much as their own films. I think the number is it's less than 5% of box office that comes from India, which is one of the largest territories, obviously, in the world. And America is even less consumption of Indian films. What's interesting with younger people now is they're discovering South Korean movies. They're discovering Indian Bollywood movies and Nollywood movies, Nigerian movies and other areas that are interesting. And so I'm very interested, and Shailesh and I have talked about partnering up in certain areas to bring greater international cooperation to the table, because filmmakers, if they're just making an Indian movie and losing potential millions of dollars in other territories where they could be testing their movies and making slight adjustments culturally, etc., and in America, it's the same thing. That's why I want to go into India. I think we're missing a huge opportunity in America by not exploiting. You mentioned Barbie, which I worked on. Barbie was a big movie in India. Oppenheimer was a big movie in India. But, America released 1,000 movies or something like 800 to 900 last year because since the post-pandemic. But the idea is, but how many of those would you see? So few. Same as us. My favorite movie 2 years ago was RRR. My favorite movie of the year in any language in the world was RRR. Now, what does that tell you? I would not have been exposed to that, but for the fact that it got such good feedback and such good award, and it was so good, it was of another level. And I'm not the only one that felt that, by the way. Many people within Hollywood felt it was their favorite movie as well. So I would love to see more of a cooperation between our two countries. We seem to be increasing our sort of political fondness for each other as well. There seems to be more happening between our two countries, which excites me, by the way, because India is so important. India has such untapped resources from their young folks, their educated folks who are really going around the world now and making a point. So it's not just all about America. And so I'd love to see that integration happen a lot more. And Shailesh, I know you agree with me on that.
Absolutely. I think we have been speaking on that.
I hope something works out between the two.
Yeah.
It's fun. It'd be fun to meet you here, Kevin. Last question, message for filmmakers who are, and this is probably, Kevin, your market is far more evolved than ours in many ways as far as research is concerned. But message for filmmakers, Shailesh, as they look at this with fear or trepidation, what would you tell them?
No, we always say we are on the same side, and I think
that's all. We want to make a good.
Yeah, we all want your work to be seen by more people and be appreciated by more people. So there is really, and it's a case of at some stage we will be able to convince you that we are on the same side. So I think it's an ongoing process, and we don't see it as any sense of fear, trepidation, or conflict. And we have been able to convert a lot of people to think differently about it. And I think that's something that is very satisfying when you see a big filmmaker change their mind on how test screenings or research is supposed to be useful to them. And I think we're at it. And maybe we're like 30-40% there.
40% number is to my mind, it's superb coming from the Indian cinema.
Super, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the
Kevin?
thing I would say to that question is it's terrifying to show your baby to a room of strangers. Get over it. You're making this movie. Get over yourselves. You're making this movie for your audience. Don't be afraid of an audience. And also, I am not a big proponent, a big fan of family and friends screenings. And I know that's how we do some in America. I know how you do some in England and some in India. And I know that you also do them because price sometimes is they want to just get a toe dip. But sometimes your friends and your family are not your best audience for a variety of reasons.
Right.
But I would tell young filmmakers, put your movie in front of a group of people. Try to not make them family and friends. Beg, borrow, steal, get a location, and just test it and just hear response. Back in the earliest days of Hollywood, and this is a good full circle ending, essentially, for me at least, in this conversation, is to say Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, all those great originals brought their comedic sequences, 20-minute sequences, up to Hollywood Boulevard, and they would piggyback at the end of a movie playing in the 1920s and the 1930s, and they would stand in the back and listen and make adjustments to see how the audiences were behaving and reacting to their pictures. Do the same thing, young filmmakers. Do the same thing.
Super. Thank you. On that note, thank you so much, Shailesh. Thank you so much, Kevin. I don't think I've done half my questions. I would have loved to have asked you more stuff, especially on specific movies.
We'll just have to come back, Vanita.
You will have to come back. You have to come to India, Kevin. You have to, and Shailesh, we must do this.
I would love to see you in person. I love what you do. I respect what you do. Shailesh and I already are talking, so we have to make that happen because I've never been to India.
Oh, you must come. You must come. That'd be lovely.
You don't even know how much I want to come. I want to come.
Come.
No, we look forward to having you.
Look forward to having you.
Vanita, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.